The U.S. has sharply reduced the number of migrant children at its largest border facility for minors. The number of unaccompanied children in the U.S. custody has now plummeted by more than 80% since March. There are about 749 children currently in custody, compared to 5,700 who were previously being held. Many of the children were forced to stay in overcrowded facilities beyond the 3-day legal limit. CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez is at Customs and Border Protection there at the facility in Lana, Texas. Camilo, good to see you. The number of unaccompanied minors in U.S. Border Patrol custody, as I mentioned, really decreased substantially by over 80% in little over a month. Where have these children gone? What is the latest?
That's an excellent question, Lana. The facility right behind me is supposed to house unaccompanied migrant children and families with minors who are recently encountered at the U.S.-Mexico border. After their stay here, they're supposed to be transferred, at least the unaccompanied children, to the Department of Health and Human Services. However, in March, there were so many children coming and so little space for them to house them that many of them were backed up here at the Border Patrol facility in Lana, Texas. At one point, there were more than 3,000 unaccompanied children at this facility right behind me. Today, there are about 300 unaccompanied children. So the population has been drastically reduced at this facility and across the entire network of border facility that the U.S. government has here along the border with Mexico. And the reason for that, Lana, is that the Department of Health and Human Services, which again is charged with the long-term care of unaccompanied minors, has been able to repurpose convention centers, work camps, and military installations in California and Texas to house unaccompanied minors. And because of this, Border Patrol has been able to expedite the release of migrant children in its custody. When I went inside today, Lana, there was no longer any severe overcrowding. Remember last month we saw hundreds of unaccompanied children crowded and packed in this facility. Now children are in groups of 8 or 7 in pods, and they have plenty of space. But again, something that I found really striking, Lana, is that some of these unaccompanied children are really young. I saw a child who was about 7 years old crying alone, sitting on a mat on the floor. I saw dozens of mothers with really young children. So the humanitarian challenges here at the border have not ended yet.
No. Camilo, were you able to speak with any of those children?
Very briefly, I spoke to 3 siblings from Honduras who were being prepared to board a bus so they can go to a shelter run by the Department of Health and Human Services. They just gave me their names, their places of origin, and told me that they were happy, obviously, to be leaving Border Patrol custody and to be going to a shelter. But I think it's very important for us to note that these shelters managed by the Department of Health and Human Services are much better setting than these Border Patrol facilities, which again are not designed to hold migrants, let alone children, for more than 72 hours.
DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is planning to visit that same facility that you are at. He's going on Friday. Tell us more about the purpose of his trip.
Yeah, so I think Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas would likely tout the dramatic decrease in the number of unaccompanied migrant children in U.S. border custody. As you mentioned during the introduction to this segment, the population in Border Patrol custody of unaccompanied minors, at least, has plummeted by 80% in just 5 weeks. So he is likely to tout efforts to expedite the processing of these children. However, I think it is still very early for him to declare victory in this effort, Lana, because there are more than 22,000 unaccompanied children still housed by the Department of Health and Human Services. And as we mentioned, those are much better settings than Border Patrol facilities, the shelters are. But the government will still need to find sponsor homes for all of these children currently in U.S. government custody.
Camilo, the administration is rolling out a new system to help the most vulnerable migrants get into the U.S. Can you explain more about how that program works?
Sure. So the Biden administration has continued to cite a public health authority first invoked under President Trump to rapidly expel most migrant adults and some families with children without allowing them to seek U.S. asylum under the premise that they could spread the coronavirus here on the U.S. So this is supposed to be a public health measure that the Biden administration has continued from the previous administration. However, advocates have been scathing in their criticism of this policy and have been urging the administration to allow vulnerable asylum seekers stranded in Mexico to be exempted from this policy and to be admitted into the U.S. so they can continue their proceedings here in the country. We now know that the Biden administration has created largely small process to start letting some of these vulnerable families and individuals into the country so they can continue their immigration proceedings here in the U.S. But it is still important to note, Lana, that most people are still being turned back under this Title 42 public health policy.
Well, the Biden administration is also beginning to reunite families that were separated under the Trump administration. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, so this week, 4 U.S.-based reunifications were slated to occur. These were the first to happen during the Biden administration. These are families that, in some cases, have not seen each other in over 3 years. We know that a mother from Mexico just reunited with her son in California on Tuesday. They were split up at the U.S.-Mexico border in late 2017, so they had not seen each other for over 3 years. The Biden administration, as you know, created this task force to locate and reunite families, and it is now saying that it will grant humanitarian parole, a legal recourse that DHS has to allow migrants to enter the country to be able to facilitate these reunifications. However, there are still about 1,000 families, according to the ACLU, that remain separated, and the ACLU wants those families to not only be able to reunite here on American soil, Lana, but to get monetary compensation, to get social services, and to get permanent legal status. And that's very important, that latter part, Lana, because these families are not being provided permanent status. They're just being allowed to enter the country legally so they can reunite here with their children.
The ACLU wants that. Any indication from the Biden administration if they're open to that idea?
The Biden administration has said on multiple occasions that it is considering long-term status options for these families, but it has not made any commitments, Lana. Again, these are families who are will typically make an asylum claim here, but of course that can take years and they could end up losing their cases, and if that happens, they could actually be deported. So we know there's a proposal in Congress by some Democratic lawmakers that would place these families on a pathway to U.S. citizenship, but it's unclear whether any Republicans will support that effort.
All right, Camilo, thanks for staying on top of the story.
Thanks, Lana.